Hello everyone, and welcome to the next lesson here in Roman history. We are going to be talking about the destruction of Pompeii, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. This is, as I will point out a little bit later, one of the more significant historical events that, quite frankly, if there is nothing else that you learn or remember in this class, I hope it will be this lesson. And I will be posting a test for each week's videos, so please listen, watch, and learn. Mount Vesuvius is in southern Italy, and it is still an active volcano. It is so active that they hold drills in the city of Naples, and these drills cover what to do in a volcanic emergency, an eruption, or even if there is an earthquake, because there are earthquakes. So it is called a seismically active zone. And people live in the shadow of this ongoing volcano, this live volcano, as they did in the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. And those two were ancient cities which were basically very close to or right next to what is now called Naples. So let's look at a brief timeline of where this event falls. Interestingly enough, in 72 BC, so about a little bit more than 100 years before this event, Spartacus would train his army of revolting slaves at the base of Mount Vesuvius. In 2 BC, Caesar Augustus became the first Caesar or emperor of Rome. In 66 AD, there was the Jewish revolt and the stand at Masada, as we saw in the video. And in 70 AD, the Jewish temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. And 9 years later, we have Pompeii, which is destroyed by Vesuvius. As you can see, the years leading up to it were very eventful for Rome. The Jewish revolt was actually a very significant revolt and called a lot of Roman troops and soldiers to the Judean area where we have Israel today. And this was a major event for them, and so was Pompeii. Now, I've included this photo here for a very specific reason. I'll get to it in just a minute, but obviously that photo was taken much more recently. That photo comes from 1944 and an eruption that took place at Vesuvius. It was Vesuvius is one of its secondary calderas which exploded in 1944. But the eruption that we are dealing with today took place on August 24th of 79 AD. And the eruption was so sudden that very few people had a chance to leave the city before it did erupt. There were some warning signs, and there was about a 24-hour period that people could have left the city and gotten things ready, but there were a lot of minor earthquakes, there were small gas explosions, people could smell things in the air. There were a couple of pumice rains and falls, and so people knew that something was coming. There was an event that was about to happen, but there was not the scientific understanding and warning capability that we have today. And so many people did not know whether this was going to be a large explosion or a small one, and simply didn't know what to do. So a lot of the townspeople remained in the city. In a bit of an ironic twist of fate, the eruption came during a festival dedicated to the god Vulcan, from which we get a term in science called volcanology. Vulcan was the Roman god of fire and the underworld, so he was the Greeks had Hades, and the Romans had both Pluto and Vulcan as gods of the fire and the underworld. So they definitely, I guess you could say, had a blast at their festival. Tragically, people were burned so quickly that the actual physical body was turned into a gas. So in the explosion, they had what is called a pyroclastic flow. And it is super, super hot. And once it hits you, your flesh burns away and your bones rot away so quickly that it really leaves basically a mold, a shell, kind of a reverse shell. We'll see an example here in a minute. But more people died from the pyroclastic flow than lava or the earthquake or anything else. This was the big killer for Pompeii. So what is a pyroclastic flow? Well, again, let's look at a couple of examples here so you understand it better. The pyroclastic flows are a super hot gas eruption that speeds down the volcano mountain at about 96, 97 kilometers per hour. That's roughly 60 miles per hour in the United States. Now each flow is a little different, but here are three main types that occur in nature. We have the one on top there of the three is the most important and probably the most likely for Pompeii, where you see the big mushroom cloud and then a part of that collapses and hugs the mountain as it comes down. Now you see the two other ones. There's an explosive dome eruption, and then the pyroclastic flow just kind of sticks to one side of the mountain, doesn't really go to both sides or all sides, not in a what we say 360 manner. And then we have another collapse of the dome with still another pyroclastic flow. So what does this look like in real life, in nature? This is a pyroclastic flow in action. This was taken in the Philippines, if I remember correctly. May have been Japan, but I believe it was the Philippines. And you can see the hot gases. That's gas. That's not lava. That's not liquid. That is hot, super hot gas and ash moving down the side of the mountain. And behind that front line of the pyroclastic flow, everything is being burned, instantly scorched, reaching thousands of degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. And remember, this is a GIF, so this is kind of slow, so you can tell that this thing is actually moving very, very fast. And you think, well, these people, why are they running so quick? Because it is so fast. They realize they probably have 2 minutes, 3 minutes of lead time before this thing arrives at where the camera is. In fact, I don't know of any footage after this point because I believe the flow hit the camera so quickly that, there's really not much beyond what you see here. Now here are the remains as I was talking about. And again, remember that, okay, and this is kind of complicated, but these are plaster casts. So these are not actual bodies. But what happened was, as I said before, the bodies were so hot and burned so quickly, and the ash stuck on their body so tightly that it made a perfect mold. This is how you create a mold. If you've ever wondered how people make some pottery or some of the plastic kitchenware that you have, this is how it is. You have a void, an empty space in the shape of what you are attempting to create, and you pour it in at super hot temperatures, and you form your object in this manner. And that is what happened to these people. When it was found that they, had this situation, they poured plaster of Paris into the holes, into the spaces, and this is what came out. Now, 2,000 people died at Pompeii, but only about 1,500 body casts have been made. And that's because only about 1,500, a little bit more, a little bit less, have been found. And there was an average of 3 meters of ash on top of any given surface. So houses, people, ditches, walls, so on. I want you to think about something, because history is more than just facts. History is more than just knowing dates and moments and times, and those are important. August 24th, 79 AD, Vesuvius explodes. Pompeii is destroyed. But look at this human face here. Think about the fact that this person had plans for the next day. He never got to do them. Maybe this person needed to go take care of personal business, maybe needed to fix a relationship that was broken, maybe needed to do important things and had put those things off till later because they thought, oh, I have all the time in the world. But that wasn't so. I want you to look at this picture over here on the left. Looks like maybe a parent and a child. Frozen there. What was the last thought in this person's mind? Maybe he saw the people there laying down, taking cover and shelter. Maybe he's looking up at a wife or a husband. Maybe this is a woman. We don't have any remains of hair or anything to tell us if it was male or female. We just have bodies. But what was that last thought? Was that a last regret of something not finished, something not done? We'll never know. Pliny the Younger wrote to a friend named Tacitus, and he said, you could hear the shrieks of women, the wailing of infants, and the shouting of men. Some were calling their parents, others their children or their wives, trying to recognize them by their voices. People bewailed or cried about their own fate or that of their relatives. And there were some who prayed for death in their terror of dying. Many sought the aid of the gods, besought the aid of the gods. But still more, imagine that there were no gods left and that the universe was plunged into eternal darkness forevermore. You see, Pliny the Younger was there when the volcano erupted. He lost his uncle, Pliny the Elder, in the crisis. His uncle had gone in and tried to rescue people and actually died in the process of trying to help others. But what is also interesting is that this should help us realize that the basic nature of people remains the same. We often deal with sudden calamity in the same manner and often think that the world is ending right then and there. And for some of us, when a crisis comes, the first thing we think about is maybe our parents. Maybe the first thing that you're going to think about in a crisis is, well, if you're older like me, you might think of a wife or a child, or a husband and a child. You're going to think, hopefully, of somebody else and not just yourself. So how do we act and respond in crises is very important to examine. Now, Vesuvius would remain in people's minds for a long time, and as I have pointed out on a previous video, Christians and Jews were routinely blamed for disasters, and this was no exception. Christians and Jews were blamed for it, and it resulted in another surge of Christian persecution. Groups are often singled out, rightly or wrongly, for blame when disasters strike. We often cannot understand how small events can become so big, and we often try to find a greater reason in the most unreasonable events. We try to find a way to blame others or to blame something else because we cannot deal with the crisis as it is. Sometimes in America, people want to blame the government because they cannot believe that a small group of terrorists could bring down 2 towers. It must have been something bigger and a grander conspiracy. No, it wasn't. It must have been because of Christians and Jews not believing in all of the gods. No, it was nature. It must have been. Our minds tend to rush to higher, more complex explanations, when oftentimes the easiest explanations are the most likely. Now, Vesuvius and the eruption preserved both Pompeii and Herculaneum in perfect condition for generations. 1,700 years after the destruction of both cities, they would be dug up and explored. And we would be able to get an idea of how much things have changed but also remain the same. Now, understand, Pompeii and Herculaneum were buried so deeply and so completely that Romans forgot where these cities were. It was almost random luck, just pure luck, that these cities were found. I'm still trying to find the exact circumstances of the dig, but it is probably and more than likely very much like in some other situations. There was a city we talked about called Ugarit. It was found because a man was trying to clean and clear out his field, getting ready for a crop. He hit a stone and he tried to get the stone out of the field, and eventually They uncovered an entire city under his field. Same thing happened at Knossos. A man tripped on a stone. He tried to dig it out of the ground so it wouldn't happen again, and then a few years later, an entire city emerges. And again, with with Pompeii and Herculaneum. Field clearing, digging, farming eventually leads to the discovery that we're trying to plant crops where there were cities. So it's quite an amazing situation. Okay, so this week we have lessons on Roman religion, Pompeii, and actually not the destruction of Jerusalem, but actually on Roman transportation. Next week we will look at 3 different leaders, Caesar, Pompey, and Hadrian. And to make these selections was very hard because there are so many Roman leaders that deserve attention, and you look at 1,000 years of history and you're like, okay, we have to make some very specific selections. Then in May we will look at some aspects of daily life, the plebeians and patricians, and then we will also look at the collapse of Rome and bring ourselves all the way up to the medieval era. Understand that in the second half of May, we will have reviews, summations, and we will have some tests. So enjoy things now.